So this was very shortly after I'd arrived to start work at the house, and this was my first task to wrap or clad this ceiling in oak. So I was having to install oak infill pieces between the existing rafters there and then wrap the rafters in oak to effectively give them a bulkier look, I guess. So after that, we obviously I needed access to that ceiling as it was quite high up, and a ladder just wouldn't cut it. So we built a little scaffold, as you'll see a little bit more of. But before that, here's a quick tour. This is the master bedroom. Shortly after I'd arrived, and everything you see here had already been done prior. So this is the current status of the house. This was to be a walk-in robe. There's been some placo on the ceiling there. It's been stopped up. And looking back out to the master bedroom with that archway created through the master bedroom and into the master ensuite. The toilet on the left archway there and a shower on the right. And that ceiling we will come back to in a bit. But there was effectively going to be a bath there and then a vanity on the adjacent wall, if that makes sense. Anyhow, this is our scaffold that we put together. Not high tech, but quite stable considering, which was good. As we enter in one of the other bedrooms, archway into the ensuite there with a vanity going in that nook and then a bathtub going in that section there. And as you can see, a lot of the placo had already been completed in this room as well. Back out into the hallway. So the green on the walls was a primer, a preparation primer that needed to go on prior to the guys troweling on the hard plaster. There's some more of it there. Entering the last bedroom now, placo done on the ceiling and some of the plastering on the wall has been completed. Walking through the robe now into the last ensuite. The vanity, one of the vanities had been done. I had two more to build in the other two bedrooms. That was to be a small shower and that was a toilet. So that's about the extent of the upstairs as it was when I arrived. Now it was time to get on with the ceiling. So this thicknesser was a lifesaver because all of the oak stock that came from the yard was different thicknesses, so I had to mill every single board to the same thickness so I could mitre the corners and get them all the same thickness, because when the boards aren't the same thickness, the mitre doesn't meet properly and give a nice clean edge. So hence why I had to run a hell of a lot of planer laps to get all these boards the same thickness. So yes, this DeWalt planer was a lifesaver. You can see the mitre on one of the pieces there that I'd already cut into it. So yeah, much man glitter or sawdust. But yeah, it needed to happen. So once I was able to mill all these down to the right thickness, I would then have to cut them to length. Here's a bit of a sped up, speedier version of me just running all of the planer laps through the thicknesser. So effectively these pieces would be cut to wrap around the rafters in that stairwell ceiling, and then I would have a different timber with a rebated edge on both sides to overlap and then do the infill pieces before the rafters were wrapped. So as you can see here, just a bit of a close-up of the beautiful grain that the oak was showing. And that's one great thing about Europe. Oak is so easy to get hold of and it's not expensive, which, yeah, you can't get it in Australia like that. So, yeah, completely different, but lovely to work with. So that little section there, you can see I've kind of finished that bit already. And then I've done the other side too and wrapped that all, which kind of gives the illusion of a oak ceiling. Well, it's not an illusion. And there's another section there outside the other bedroom that needed to be done as well. And the centre section, which I'll come back to, was left empty or left alone for the time being. So this is Mimi, my mate on site, who would join me for lunch every day. She was a little adorable little thing. So yeah, she was part of my day most days, pretty much every day, to be honest. So thank goodness most of this was an indoor job because it allowed me to crack on with my work, not being held up because of weather. So as the rain turns to the sun, we can get back on with the woodworking. So this is an example of a length of the milled timber that came from the yard. It already had the rebaited edges on it, as you can see, as Mimi jumps up, as she would every day to join me for lunch. Little scavenger. So we left that centre section alone because we needed to cut in 2 Veluxes, which was to be done by others. So we found an aesthetic and practical location for both of them, marked them out on the ceiling as is evident, and then we had to wait for the guys to come to cut them out. It wasn't worth the risk to try and clad that ceiling in the oak, so I knew the exact final location of the penetrations of the Velux, and I could clad and achieve a precise surround finish around the Velux, as you'll see later in the photos. Living your best life? And as you saw, the Veluxes had been installed after a small delay, which meant I could crack on with getting this centre section of the ceiling complete. So this is just now a switch from video to a photo dump from my phone, going back to the start of the job, showing the existing conditions. So these are my bespoke hand-cut oak sections that I'd used to wrap the rafters in, and I had to stack them in a certain way, which I'll tell you about in a second. These are the oak sections that were rebaited from the yard that I'd used to cut for the infill pieces, and this was my roof numbering system. So there was a delay on the Veluxes being cut in and installed, so I'd already pre-cut all of this oak to length, to size, to everything, which meant that I needed to label it and number it and stack it in a way that meant that when I came back to it after a delay on this section of the job, that I could just pick up or walk over to any section and I knew exactly where it was going to go. So I came up with this numbering system that I knew each bay was numbered and it was labelled in order of each piece that would go in, so I knew exactly where it was all going, which kind of made sense to me, but it probably doesn't make sense to anyone else. So that's what happened, and it just made sense to leave that section unclad because I wanted to make sure that those, even though we'd marked out, which you'll see in a little bit, which you've probably already seen in the videos, we've marked out where the Velux was going to go. I wanted to make sure that they were the exact locations of it, because if I had assumed that that's where it was going to be, and then for some reason the guys came on site, cut it out, and it was in a different spot, then I would have been left a little short and it would have been quite ugly. So that was my reasoning, and I played it sort of safe in that sense, so that I knew that when it came time to install everything, I was going to get a perfect finish that I was going to be satisfied with, and pretty hard to satisfy. So anyway, looking at some photos, I'd obviously gone along over the ceiling with a clear coat and protection coat as I went along, which went on quite wet at the start and brought out the grain a lot and then receded, but it still provided a good protection for longevity going forward. So that was worthwhile doing, I think. That was my work car too. Downstairs we did a little oak ceiling in the pantry, which tied in nicely with the upstairs stairwell. And here we go with the markings for the Velux cutouts. So the best, well, that was one in the master ensuite as well, which was going to have a Velux, but not clad in oak. So we found the best practical and aesthetic spots for the Velux, which came in the box and then got installed, which then meant that I could crack on, as you can see, with this centre section of cladding. So I was able to run the boards right up to the edge of the Velux and then create a shroud that would effectively slide up, like a square box that would effectively slide up to the underside of the Velux, creating like a narrow or a shallow light well. And then I could just butt my, or mitre, I actually mitred it, into that sort of short light well, which created a nice sharp sort of edge around the Velux and finished it off nicely.